Shabbat Shalom. You know, I was going to start this sermon by talking about the 7 days versus 8 days. So now my sermon has become shorter. So we can eat our matzah sooner. But I will say a few things. One, I won't be so conciliatory because I think Reformed Jews and Jews in Israel are right. Pesach is 7 days, but when it bumps into Shabbat, you should eat matzah on Shabbat. But I will say also, looking at Israeli friends on Facebook or friends of friends, and in Israel, Pesach is always 7 days, but this year was Shabbat, and they were complaining, we can't eat, challah on Shabbat. But this is the way that they're happy, is that Jews that don't eat kitniot, grains that aren't the 5 grains that you make matzah out of, and beans and things like that, you can keep those in your house during Pesach. You just can't eat them. So they say, well, on Shabbat we're going to go crazy with kitniot. Okay. So it's not Pesach, it's Shabbat. But it's also the period after Pesach, or during Pesach and then after Pesach, where we count up to Shavuot. It says in the Torah that you count the days between what became in tradition the second day of Pesach up to Shavuot. There are 50 days where Shavuot, the holiday where we celebrate the giving of the Torah, we're preparing ourselves by counting up. It's called the counting of the Omer. The Omer was a measurement of wheat of barley that you would bring to the temple, and then on Shavuot you would bring wheat sacrifices, because that began the wheat harvest. Pesach began the barley harvest. So Omer, the counting of the Omer, means counting the days when the people would bring their Omer, their bushel of barley. Bushel, I don't know, is that a good word? Whatever, their measurement of barley. So these 40 days we count, or these 50 days we count 49 in the evening, up to 49 in the evening, and then on the 50th evening is Shavuot. And there's different traditions of things to do during this period to prepare yourself for Shavuot. Some traditions say the beginning, the first 33 days is a mourning period, and you don't get married at that time for various reasons. And there's different spiritual practices like studying from the Tractate of Avot from the Mishnah, which are sayings of the ancient sages, often ethical sayings, wisdom sayings. And some people will chant Shir HaShirim or study Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, throughout the period of the Omer. But I want to talk about Avot a little bit. Some people call Pirkei Avot, the chapters of principles of. I don't like saying it. Some people translate it as the chapters of our fathers. That's what Avot means. But I don't think it really means that here, because the ancient rabbis, are not usually called our fathers. The fathers are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Avot can also mean principles, the chapters of principles, not like school principle, but like ethical principles. And in chapter 6 of Avot, in the 6th Mishnah, there are it lists 48 things that you need to acquire Torah. So some people will study this Mishnah for 48 days during the 49 days of the Omer counting, one at a time, to these 49 things you need to acquire the Torah so you're ready at Shavuot. So I'm going to list these quickly because there's 48. You need learning, listening, preparation of your speech, understanding of the heart, intellect of the heart, reverence, awe, humility, happiness, purity, service of sages, care of friends, debate between students, clarification. You need to study the Torah. You need the Mishnah. The minimization of merchandise. I think that means like acquiring things. You need to minimize that. Minimization of worldly occupation means don't work too hard. Don't become obsessed with your work. Minimization of pleasure. Don't be a hedonist. Minimization of sleep. Get your 8 hours, please. Minimization of conversation, minimization of laughter, patience, generosity, trust of sages, acceptance of afflictions, knowing one's place, gladness in one's portion, erection of offense to one's words, meaning guarding your words, lack of self-aggrandizement, lovableness, love of God, love of creatures, love of righteousness, or love of the righteous, love of the upright, love of rebuke, meaning to tell people when they've done wrong, but nicely. Distancing from honor, lack of arrogance in learning, lack of joy in legal decisions, lifting up the burden of your fellow, judging by giving the benefit of the doubt, placing truth, placing your friend with truth, placing your friend with peace, deliberation and study, questioning and responding, hearing and adding, learning in order to teach and learning in order to act, making one's master wiser, one's teacher wiser, focusing one's teaching, and then saying a teaching in the name of one who said it. You need to do these things to be able to say that you have acquired Torah, to be able to say that you are a student of Torah. We can't live up to all of them, but we constantly strive to live up to these things. These development of virtues, these ethical teachings. But I want to focus on one of them, because there's a 19th century Lithuanian rabbi, Simcha Zisl, the altar of Kelm, not to be confused with Chelm, which was in Poland, that's where my father-in-law is from, but Kelm was in Lithuania, where he says the most important of these 48 things is the bearing the burden of your fellow. It comes towards the end of the list. It's not the first, it's not the last, so it's interesting. Maybe he's saying there's no order to these things, but bearing the burden of your fellow is the most important of them. The most important notion from the Torah, he would say. The central verse of the Torah, love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Akiva says is the most important verse of the Torah. Simcha Zisl says how you do that is bearing the burden for your fellow. It's what made Moses, he says, fit to receive the Torah. Moses bared the burden of his fellow, he says, when he saw the Israelite slave being beaten by the Egyptian, and he killed the Egyptian. He took on this Israelite's pain. It's what Moses did when he saw Zipporah and her sisters at a well being abused by shepherds. He took on their pain. And it's also what Moses did when he saw that one of his little sheep went away and saw that it was thirsty. So he put it on his shoulder to carry it back to the flock, and then God made the bush burn. Because Moses bared the burden of a slave, bared the burden of, it says here, women, and of even a sheep. He was then the person to receive the Torah. So how else do we know that this is the most important thing, bearing the burden of your fellow? Simcha Zisl goes to Parshat Mishpatim, which is after the giving of the Torah, after the Sinai moment, and it's a portion mostly with laws of how to create the society the Israelites were going to create. But then at the end of the portion, the elders of the Israelites had this encounter with God. And it says that God is sitting on this throne, and at God's feet, it says, is this brickwork made of sapphire. The medieval commentator Rashi says that this brickwork is there, notice it's bricks, because God contemplated the bricks that the Israelites were forced to make. So God is taking on the pain of the Israelites. God is also doing visualization exercises by thinking about it. God's meditating on the pain of the Israelites. And Simcha Zissel Ziv says, and now we add to this wondrous insight, a well-known saying of the wise, pain and joy are interlaced with one another. That is, after pain will come joy, and joy will be much greater than if one hadn't experienced the pain before the joy. And now, when the Israelite elders saw that these bricks were clear like heaven, they were already redeemed, meaning they already left Egypt. Why did the Torah need to add the phrase, a pavement of sapphire, which is this memorial to the pain of the Israelites? Only, it would seem, that God had before them the pavement of sapphire, in contrast to the very heavens for clearness, to raise, as it were, the joy in contrast to this. And obviously, God, the Blessed One, has no need of this. God doesn't need these things to remind God of the pain. Rather, it is to teach God's love for the treasured people and to teach all humanity how important is the obligation of bearing the burden with one's fellows, to be sorry in their sorrow, and to rejoice in their joy. And this is a wonder of wonder that God helps us to understand this wondrous height. It's a little confusing here, but he's saying it's after the exodus from Egypt. They're not slaves anymore. God doesn't need these bricks anymore. But God is showing them that no, you need to continue to meditate on the pain of others, to empathize, to take on this pain, and to continue to bear the burden of others. The contemporary Rabbi Ira Stone, commenting on this comment by Simcha Zissel, this insight leads Rabbi Simcha to ask a remarkable question concerning redemption. Since Moses and the elders were brought up to see God's throne after the redemption from Egypt, why did the Torah return to the sapphire brickwork, which functioned as a memorial of Israel's pain? Would it cause pain for the people who were recently redeemed, who presumably still bear the memory of pain close at hand? It was necessary precisely because redemption was not simply the liberation from slavery, but rather must be understood as bearing the burden of the other, which continues well beyond the physical redemption from Egypt. This idea, which Rabbi Simcha calls a great height or a high level of understanding, is taught to us by God. Although God has no personal need for sapphire brickwork, it girds the divine throne as an actor of loving teaching, of Musar, so that we might understand this important lesson. Thus, to bear the burden of the other leads to redemption and sustains redemption. So twice a day in our Siddur, we have a blessing. We say God redeemed Israel. At Pesach, we talk about it over and over again. Yesterday, we sang the Song of the Sea, where the people were redeemed from Egypt. But redemption is ongoing. And it is by bearing the burden of the other that you have these moments of redemption that then can lead to more redemption and a future redemption. Ira Stone says that this is the world to come, but we get moments of the world to come when we are bearing the burden of the other. Redemption with a capital R for a fleeting moment, right then. So bearing the burden of the other doesn't mean just to contemplate like God is doing. It means to actually save people. I heard an interview recently, someone who's writing a book about charity, and he's arguing in the book between charity directly helping people and charity that changes systems so that people are changing the system to alleviate poverty or alleviate oppression or things like that. And it's a very interesting question. We at Holy Blossom just the other day had a Seder with Via Hafta, an organization that helps people very directly on the streets and in vulnerable life situations, and we fed many people. It's very important. Moments of redemption. But did our Seder do anything to change the system so there aren't so many very vulnerable people in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, in the world? But the Premier was there, so maybe she got the picture. I don't know. So, redemption in moments, but the great redemption maybe is closer and farther away at the same time. We can think, I think maybe the most dramatic problem right now in our news, if we read the Jewish news, if we read the Israeli press, and also the New York Times and the Globe and Mail, and the Star, are asylum seekers in Israel. And during the week of Pesach, the week where we most seriously focus on redemption, the Prime Minister of Israel reneged on an agreement to help asylum seekers. I don't know what else to say. Little moments of redemption and great redemptions, helping people directly, changing systems, and contemplating what it means to bear the burden of the other. This is a message of Pesach, but this is a message of every day to be a Jew. Shabbat Shalom.